Every touch on my skin, every quick hookup stolen between chemo sessions was a primal scream against the diagnosis. We made our bedroom the one place death was not allowed to enter. We loved each other with the desperate urgency of those who know they must fit an eternity of orgasms and memories into a single instant. Love couldn't defeat the disease, but for a time, it made life itself beg for one more moan, for one last act of desperate desire. Our love became an act of violent, passionate defiance. Every single touch on my skin, every stolen moment of quick, frantic sex between his brutal chemotherapy sessions was a primal scream against the diagnosis. We knew the clock was ticking down, and this knowledge made us reckless, forcing us to explore depths of connection that only true desperation can unlock. The physical intimacy was raw, not just about pleasure, but about confirming that he was still here, still him, vibrant and alive beneath the failing flesh. We loved each other with a desperate, burning passion, knowing we needed to fit an eternity of orgasms and cherished memories into a single fleeting instant. There was no gentle waiting, no soft ease into tomorrow. Only the frantic, all-consuming need for now. It wasn't sustainable, it wasn't healthy, but it was real and it was ours. The doctors talked about science, but we were living a frantic love story written in sweat and tears, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to surrender to fate. Gabriel had always been so composed, so rational, but the disease stripped that away, revealing a wildness I adored. He clung to me after every stolen moment, his breath shallow, whispering things that only the dying dare to say. He traced the lines of my face as if memorizing the map back to me, knowing that one day the darkness would come and he might forget. He was terrified, and so was I, but in the heat of our desperate embrace, we found a dangerous, temporary kind of peace. Love itself couldn't ultimately defeat the insidious disease that was consuming him, but for a precious, fleeting time, it made life itself beg for one more moan, for one more desperate last act of desire. This wasn't the life we planned. It was far more chaotic, more tragic, and infinitely more profound. We were running out of time, and though I didn't know it yet, the secret that had been sealed between us was far more dangerous than the illness. But first, I needed to know the truth about how he got sick. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because you might relate to this story. The urgency of our love had a rhythm, a desperate choreography dictated by Gabriel's chemotherapy schedule. We learned to maximize the precious few days of energy he had, turning our quiet moments into a frenzy of touch and connection. One afternoon, while tracing the faint lines on his chest, the ones not covered by the surgical scars that now defined his life, I noticed something new. It wasn't the thin, precise line left by the surgeon, but an older, jagged scar hidden just beneath his collarbone. It looked rough, almost aggressive, like a wound that had been poorly stitched up years ago. "Hey, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, my fingers exploring the raised, pale skin. Gabriel immediately flinched, a sharp, involuntary jerk that pulled him away from my touch. His eyes, usually so loving and direct, suddenly looked distant and clouded, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pain from the chemotherapy. It was something colder, something rooted deep in a past he had always guarded fiercely. He quickly pulled the sheet higher, covering the evidence and shutting down the moment completely. "It's nothing, Maya, just an old accident from my residency days." "Stupid mistake," he mumbled, his jaw tight. The dismissal was too fast, too rehearsed. The shift in his demeanor was a massive red flag flapping wildly in my face. We had shared our bodies, our deepest fears, and the terror of facing death together, yet here was a tiny piece of skin, a small scar that he wouldn't let me touch or acknowledge. It felt like a betrayal, or at least a monumental omission of fact. Later that evening, the tension between us became a driving, electric need. We needed to feel something solid, something real, to dissolve the sudden wedge of that secret. He approached me with a ferocity I hadn't seen before, stripping away my clothes with a hungry urgency. Our lovemaking was fast and rough, less about tenderness and more about consuming each other whole, a desperate attempt to use the heat of the moment to incinerate his secret. It was a fleeting, magnificent distraction, leaving both of us exhausted and breathless on the bed. But when it was over and the raw, sweet scent of sex filled the room, the silence was heavier than before. The truth, like a persistent ghost, lingered right there in the darkness between us. I knew with the gut certainty only a woman in love possesses that the scar was no stupid mistake. It was a key to a history he was hiding, a past that somehow inexplicably felt connected to his present diagnosis. His carefully constructed life had a major fault line. I stared at the ceiling fan, the shadows spinning above us in the weak light from the street. The urgency of his impending death hadn't vanished. It had simply been momentarily displaced by a terrifying new question. If he was lying about something so fundamental, what other deadly secrets was he keeping from me? The next morning, while Gabriel was gone for a crucial consultation, I found myself drawn back to the hidden scar beneath his collarbone. The fear had curdled into a cold, hard determination. I couldn't face his death knowing there was a piece of his life, a dangerous piece, that remained locked away from me. I slipped into his study, a place he kept meticulously organized, the sanctuary of his rational medical mind. It was a space I rarely entered, respecting his need for professional boundaries, but boundaries were dissolving now. I started with his old medical files, not the current ones detailing the cancer, but the archived paperwork from his residency years in Chicago. He always spoke of that time with vague fondness, mentioning long hours and grueling shifts, but never any specific details. Hidden deep beneath a stack of old journals, I found a discharge summary dated almost 10 years ago, correlating perfectly with the scar I discovered. The paperwork wasn't about the injury itself, but listed the side effects: severe systemic reaction, blood toxicity, and an elevated presence of heavy metals. My blood ran cold. The jagged scar wasn't from a simple fall or a rush suture. It was the result of a near-fatal exposure to something highly toxic. And what did the current cancer diagnosis say? That the specific, rare type of tumor in his liver was most often linked to prolonged environmental or chemical poisoning. The connection was too specific, too frightening to ignore. His current illness wasn't just bad luck. It was a consequence. I leaned against the desk, my hands shaking as I connected the dots. The accident during his residency wasn't a mistake. It was an occupational hazard, maybe even a direct attack. The files mentioned an investigation, but the final pages were missing, ripped out cleanly as if someone wanted to erase the conclusion. This wasn't just Gabriel's past. This was the smoking gun that explained his present terminal condition. He hadn't just gotten sick. Something or someone had poisoned him, slowly and systematically. The air felt thin, the familiar furniture of our apartment now alien and menacing. The man I loved, the man I was fighting for with every desperate act of intimacy, was a victim of a deep, years-old conspiracy. I knew I had to confront him, but I needed more than just a vague summary. I needed the missing pages. I needed a name. And then I saw it, a small embossed card tucked into the spine of a medical textbook, an address for a defunct Chicago lab where he did his residency. I quickly photographed the discharge summary and the address, my heart hammering a frantic beat against my ribs, and slid everything back into place just as I heard the key turning in the lock. Gabriel was home. His face was pale, his energy depleted, but his eyes held that familiar, possessive hunger. I knew I was about to lie to the man I loved, but the truth I just uncovered meant my silence was the only thing keeping us both safe. The moment Gabriel walked through the door, his weakened body leaning on the frame, I forced a wide, loving smile onto my face. It was the best performance of my life, hovering the frantic fear and the massive weight of the secret I now carried. He looked exhausted, defeated by the harsh cocktail of drugs they were pumping into him. I moved toward him, not just with love, but with a calculated desperation, needing to mask the scent of his old files that I was sure clung to my skin. I had to make him forget everything but me. I pulled him into the bedroom, stripping the clinical fear from his eyes with the urgency of my desire. "Forget the hospital, forget the numbers," I whispered against his neck, my fingers already unbuttoning his shirt. Our lovemaking became an elaborate, sensual distraction. a way for me to physically dominate the moment and steer his focus away from the questions he might ask. I needed him to believe that this immediate, raw passion was the only thing consuming me. He responded with the same hungry intensity, desperate to feel life asserting itself over the constant shadow of death. While his breathing deepened in the afterglow, I began my subtle interrogation, weaving questions into post-sex pillow talk. I ran my fingers over the hidden scar again, this time with feigned innocence. "You know, this residency story always felt vague," I murmured, my voice soft against his ear. "Did you work with anyone interesting in Chicago? Any mentors who shaped you?" I watched his face closely, searching for the flicker of recognition or the sudden tension in his jaw that would betray his knowledge. Gabriel shifted, pulling me closer, the protective instinct still strong even in his weakened state. "It was just work, Maya. Long hours, old labs. Nothing that matters now," he insisted, kissing the top of my head, a classic evasion. He mentioned a named Dr. Alistair Vaughan, brilliant but notoriously difficult senior doctor who ran the specific research unit. The way he said the name was devoid of affection, carrying a cold, almost resentful edge, a detail that immediately registered in my frantic mind. Alistair Vaughan. I filed the name away, a new piece added to the growing and terrifying puzzle. I knew now that I couldn't trust his words, only his actions, and the secrets he couldn't keep hidden. Lying to him about my investigation felt necessary, an act of protective selfishness, because I knew confronting him directly would only push him further away, locking the truth down forever. I needed to move quietly like a ghost, gathering evidence before I shattered our fragile, passionate world. That night, after he finally drifted into a pain-induced sleep, I crept out of bed, grabbing my laptop. I stared at the Chicago address and the name Alistair Vaughan, the two elements that now seemed to hold the key to his impending death. I had to know what really happened in that lab 10 years ago, even if the answer meant facing a danger far greater than any disease. I booked the flight for the following morning, knowing I was crossing a line from greeting lover to reckless detective. Chicago was a freezing slap of reality compared to the controlled warmth of our New York apartment. I arrived under the guise of visiting an old college friend, a necessary lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. I took a cab straight to the address from the old file, a nondescript industrial building on the city's outskirts, the kind of place that swallowed secrets whole. The lab, supposedly defunct, sat dark and silent behind a chain-link fence, the faded sign reading, Vaughan Research and Development. The place looked exactly like what it was, a crime scene long forgotten. I found a weak spot in the fence, a loose section near a thicket of overgrown weeds, and slipped through, the metallic tang of rust clinging to my gloves. The back door was heavy and slightly ajar, a chilling invitation. Stepping inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay, dust, and something sharply chemical, a scent that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The place felt preserved in time, a sterile tomb, the perfect setting for a decade-old tragedy that was slowly claiming my husband's life. I moved through the dark hallways, using my phone's weak flashlight to navigate past overturned carts and shattered glassware. This was where Gabriel spent his grueling residency, immersed in cutting-edge research that promised life, but delivered a slow, insidious death. I finally located the research wing that correlated with his file, finding a small, sealed refrigerator tucked away in a corner of the main testing room. Its humming was the only sign of life in the entire abandoned facility, and I instantly knew it held the key. The small lock on the fridge was old but stubborn. My fingers, usually steady enough to handle a delicate paintbrush, fumbled with a hairpin I'd brought, fueled by adrenaline and utter desperation. When the lock finally sprung open, I held my breath, bracing myself for some horrifying evidence. Inside, neatly labeled and preserved in clear plastic vials, were blood samples, dozens of them, labeled not with names but with dates that spanned the time of Gabriel's accident. My eyes scanned the labels, and there it was, right near the front, a vial dated the day after his near-fatal exposure, labeled simply GA heavy metal load, but next to it was another sample, much newer, with a date from just 6 months ago, after his cancer diagnosis, also labeled GA, Someone had been here recently. Someone was still monitoring him. The hair on my arms stood up. The terror was palpable, cold, and absolute. This wasn't just a cold case. This was an active operation. I quickly grabbed both files, shoving them deep into my coat pocket. As I turned to flee, a shadow moved sharply outside the lab window, a fleeting glimpse of someone standing too close, watching the door. I knew then that leaving Chicago alive might be harder than getting in, and the truth I held in my pocket was a death sentence for us both. I returned to New York hours later, the vials tucked securely in a refrigerated container. The cold truth of Chicago a metallic weight in my heart. But when Gabriel woke, frail and tired, all the secrets and conspiracies dissolved, replaced by a devastating, beautiful clarity. I had to choose the truth that might save us or the fragile peace that let us love each other fully, without distraction, one last time. For one night, I chose him. I chose us. The hospital bed had been exchanged for our own plush mattress, but the reality remained. He was weaker now, moving with a noticeable slowness, the light in his eyes dimmer. Yet, the moment I touched him, the pure, essential connection snapped back into place, hot and undeniable. We didn't speak of doctors or diagnoses. We spoke with our hands, our lips, and the frantic rhythm of our bodies. He initiated the embrace with a soft, aching tenderness I hadn't felt since before the disease took hold. We made love not with the reckless desperation of the previous weeks, but with a profound, almost mournful intimacy. Every movement was slow, deliberate, a sacred act of memorization. His hands, though thin, moved over my skin with purpose, mapping every curve, every dip, as if engraving my memory onto his soul. I kissed every scar and line on his body, worshiping the strength that still resided within him, mourning the life we were losing. It was the deepest, most spiritual connection we had ever shared. "I need you to feel this, Maya," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat, his eyes wide with a heartbreaking clarity. "I need you to remember this heat, this intensity. Don't let the sadness erase it." He held me so tightly, pulling me close until there was no space left between us, as if hoping his fierce love could physically prevent the disease from taking the final step. The love was so raw, so potent. It tasted of salt and desperation, a sublime mix of pleasure and pain. It was our ultimate act of rebellion, a final, beautiful surrender to each other, a way of proving that even if our time was short, the love itself was an endless, powerful force. In that moment, the vials in the refrigerator, the flight to Chicago, and the terrifying name Alistair Vaughn ceased to exist. There was only the sound of our breathing, the exquisite friction of our bodies, and the shared, silent promise to burn every last bit of life we had left. The exhaustion that followed was total, but it was peaceful. He fell asleep with his head nestled in the crook of my neck, his weight comforting, his scent familiar. But as I stared at the ceiling, the peace shattered. The memory of the shadow watching the lab window flashed in my mind. I had sacrificed precious time for this final, desperate act of love, but the clock wasn't just ticking on his life. It was ticking on my secret, and I knew I had to act before he discovered the truth about his past himself. The intense, reckless energy we had summoned for our final night quickly gave way to a sobering reality. Gabriel's good days were growing rarer, and the fatigue became a constant, crushing presence. We spent less time fighting and more time simply existing, side by side. The silence in our apartment was no longer the peaceful quiet of two people comfortable together, but the heavy, leaden silence of two people waiting for the final curtain to drop. His hands, once strong and vibrant as he held a scalpel, now trembled uncontrollably when he tried to lift a cup of water. I learned to love him in a new way, a quiet, gentle love focused on caregiving and small, profound acts of service. I was his anchor, tending to the basics, ensuring he took his medication, adjusting the pillows behind his back, helping him through the waves of nausea. This routine was exhausting, yet strangely sacred. I saw every moment as a gift, knowing that this version of our love, the one defined by pain and sacrifice, was just as real and important as the fiery passion that first drew us together in the beginning. But the emotional distance was widening not because of lost love, but because of his relentless refusal to acknowledge the end. Gabriel, the scientist who lived by data and facts, refused to look at the statistics that dictated his remaining time. He would not talk about funeral arrangements, or what I should do with his possessions, or even where I should spread his ashes. He held on to the illusion of recovery with a stubborn, childlike faith that shattered my heart every time he mentioned next summer. His silence became a wall between us. Thick and unforgiving, he knew I knew. He knew I was facing the terror of a future without him, but he wouldn't let me share the burden of his final thoughts. He retreated into himself, perhaps trying to spare me the grief, but his protective distance only amplified my loneliness. We were sleeping in the same bed, but separated by a universe of unspoken goodbyes, and the pain of that emotional divide was often worse than the physical suffering I witnessed daily. One evening, he was struck by a sudden, intense pain that left him gasping for air, his face contorted. I rushed to his side, holding him tightly until the spasm passed, praying silently for an intervention that wouldn't come. When the pain subsided, leaving him weak and weeping in my arms, I finally saw the raw terror in his eyes, not just the fear of death, but the fear of leaving me alone. He didn't need to speak a single word. The truth of his despair was written clearly on his ravaged face. "I don't want to go, Maya," he finally choked out, the words ripped from the deepest part of his soul. It was the first time he had admitted the reality out loud, and the fragile dam of my own composure instantly broke. We clung to each other, two devastated souls finally sharing the grief that had been separating us. It was a moment of absolute truth, but it came with a terrifying price, the realization that the few precious weeks we had left were truly counting down to zero. The intimacy of that shared breakdown in the last chapter cracked open a small window of honesty between us, but it didn't last. Gabriel reverted to his protective silence, yet he began sharing fragments of his past, almost as if clearing his conscience before the end. It wasn't about the scar or the lab. It was about small, seemingly innocuous details of his early life, stories meant to soothe my grief rather than solve a mystery. He told me about his father, a successful, driven man who was always obsessed with Gabriel achieving something significant. He talked at length about a specific mentor during his undergraduate years, a history professor named Elias Cole, who championed his move away from liberal arts and into medicine. Cole convinced me that science was the only path to real power and legacy, Gabriel recounted one afternoon, his voice thin, looking out the window at the distant cityscape. The professor sounded intensely influential, almost a father figure, pushing Gabriel toward the demanding life that ultimately led him to the toxic lab in Chicago. I listened patiently, stroking his hair, but my mind was already racing, comparing this new piece of information with the name from the archived file. Dr. Alistair Vaughan, the demanding senior doctor. Could these two figures, the history professor and the toxicologist, be connected? Was it possible that this Professor Cole wasn't just a guide, but part of a larger, darker web that led to his fatal exposure? The idea felt like a wild leap, but the timing and the intensity of their influence were too specific to dismiss entirely. Later that evening, after giving him his pain medication, I sat beside him, the desire to connect one last time overriding my need for answers. He reached for me, his touch barely a whisper against my arm, and I leaned in, kissing him with a deep, aching tenderness. He was so incredibly fragile now, his body a battlefield, yet the soul I loved still shone through. He pulled me close, and we held each other, the sex now replaced by this desperate need for physical closeness, a merger of skin and bone against the invading coldness of death. "Promise me, Maya," he rasped, his eyes locking onto mine with alarming intensity. "Promise me you won't let my work just disappear. Find a way to make my life mean something, even when I'm gone." It was a plea, a final act of vulnerability that cut straight through my heart. He wasn't talking about his medical notes. He was talking about his legacy, his purpose, the driving force behind all his ambition, the ambition that may have led to his poisoning. I held him tighter, whispering a vow I knew I had to keep, even if it meant risking my life by returning to Chicago and confronting Alistair Vaughan. His plea for legacy unintentionally reactivated the detective in me. The key wasn't in the chemicals. It was in the ambition, and I knew Professor Elias Cole was the next thread I had to pull before Gabriel's own silence became permanent. The promise I made to Gabriel to protect his legacy felt less like a comfort and more like a heavy, urgent command. While he slept, struggling for breath, I was back on the laptop, the screen illuminating the dark urgency of my mission. I started with Elias Cole, the history professor who supposedly guided Gabriel away from the humanities and into the cold, clinical world of medicine. It was time to see if the mentor who shaped Gabriel's ambition was connected to the man who gave him the poison. A quick search confirmed that Professor Cole had been a fixture at the University of Chicago, specializing in the history of ethics and power structures. The first articles were typical academic praise, but I scrolled deeper, my fingers flying over the trackpad, driven by a desperate need for the connection. I finally found a tiny, overlooked article in a regional online newspaper, dated around the same time as Gabriel's accident. It was a piece detailing a minor funding scandal at the university. The article focused on accusations that a prestigious grant meant for ethical research had been improperly funneled to a private pharmaceutical lab run by a former student. The name of the former student and the lab immediately snapped the puzzle into a terrifying focus. Alistair Vaughan. And Vaughan Research and Development? My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic beat. Elias Cole, the history professor, was the financial pipeline directly connecting Gabriel to the man who handled the toxins. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate web of influence and corruption. Cole had steered Gabriel toward Vaughan, likely knowing that his brilliant, ambitious student would be the perfect, expendable guinea pig for some unethical research. This wasn't a simple workplace accident. This was a calculated betrayal orchestrated by the man Gabriel saw as a mentor. The truth was far colder and more sinister than I had ever imagined. A dark shadow cast over everything Gabriel had achieved. The sheer ruthlessness of the plan using ambition to lead a promising student to a slow, agonizing death was sickening. It felt like something out of a thriller, not the reality of the quiet, loving man sleeping just a few feet away. I stared at the blood vials in the mini fridge I'd hidden in the kitchen, the cold evidence now screaming a clear narrative of betrayal and long-term surveillance. They hadn't stopped watching Gabriel after the exposure. They were waiting for him to die to ensure their secret was safe. But they hadn't factored in the fierce, protective love of the woman who shared his bed. I knew the danger had just escalated from a historical mistake to a present threat. If Cole and Vaughan were working together, they would stop at nothing to retrieve those vials. I grabbed my keys, knowing I had to get the samples to a trustworthy, independent lab before they came for the evidence. And for me, the fear I felt wasn't a cold panic anymore. It was a white-hot wave of protective fury. I rushed to the kitchen, retrieving the 2 precious vials, the decade-old sample and the recent one from the small hidden fridge. These weren't just tubes of blood. They were concrete evidence of betrayal and murder, and I knew I couldn't keep them in the apartment any longer. I wrapped them meticulously in insulation and placed them inside a discreet, unmarked thermal bag. I had located a private testing facility downtown that promised absolute discretion, and I needed to get the samples there immediately. Just as I pulled on my coat and grabbed my keys, the quiet peace of the apartment was violently shattered. 3 sharp, insistent knocks echoed through the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the gentle rhythm of a neighbor or the familiar sound of Gabriel's friend. It was heavy and authoritative, demanding entry. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against the sudden, terrifying silence that followed the knock. I froze by the front door, staring through the peephole. My blood ran cold, fear paralyzing every muscle in my body. Standing outside were 2 men in cheap, ill-fitting suits, their expressions flat and impersonal, radiating an air of cold, professional menace. They didn't look like police. They looked like cleanup crew. One of them had his hand resting casually inside his jacket, a gesture that screamed, danger. They knew I was inside. I backed away silently, the thermal bag clutched tightly against my chest. They weren't just waiting for Gabriel to die. They were actively protecting their secret. The discovery of Cole's involvement must have triggered their alarm. They were here for the missing evidence, the vials I had risked everything to retrieve from the Chicago lab. I glanced quickly at the bedroom door. Gabriel was sleeping, thankfully deep under the effect of his powerful medication, oblivious to the terrifying peril unfolding 10 feet away. My mind raced. There was no time to explain, no time to call for help. I moved quickly to the small fire escape door in the kitchen, fumbling with the deadbolt. The man began knocking again, louder this time, testing the strength of the door, and I could hear the wood splintering slightly under the impact. I managed to wrench the deadbolt open, sending a quiet prayer into the silent night, hoping the rusty mechanism wouldn't betray me. I slipped out onto the narrow, icy staircase, pulling the door shut behind me, the sound of the metal clanking echoing far too loudly in the quiet night. I was now a fugitive, running down the back alleys of New York with the proof of a murder conspiracy in my bag, leaving the man I loved to sleep peacefully through the most dangerous moment of our lives. I had escaped them for now, but I knew with chilling certainty that they would be back, and next time, they wouldn't stop at just knocking. The freezing metal rungs of the fire escape bit into my hands, the cold a sharp, painful contrast to the warmth I had just left behind. I was running blindly down the side of the building, the small thermal bag containing the vials swinging wildly, threatening to betray me with every clank. The pounding of my heart was louder than the city traffic below, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer terror of what I'd just seen. They were professional. They were organized. And they had found us. Flashback initio, suddenly, the cold metal vanished. My mind flashed back to a night just weeks ago, a rare moment Gabriel was feeling strong. We had been arguing a brief, desperate fight about his reckless refusal to slow down his work. The tension had been thick until he grabbed my wrist, his eyes burning with a dark, primal heat, and pulled me across the room. He didn't say a word, but the silent promise in his gaze was a challenge I couldn't resist. He wanted to solve the argument with pure, urgent lust. He had ripped my shirt, tearing the fabric in his desperation, and we fell onto the cool, polished wood floor, making love with a frenzied, consuming speed. It wasn't gentle. It was a hungry, desperate claiming, a physical conversation that needed no language, only breath and touch. Every thrust was a promise, every moan a temporary victory over the inevitable disease that was trying to claim him. We were fierce, fighting the world and the clock with our bodies, trying to absorb enough of each other to last an eternity. Flashback Fim, the memory snapped back, replaced by the grim reality of the alley floor hitting my worn boots. That raw, desperate act of love was exactly why I was running now. I wasn't just saving myself. I was saving his memory, his honor, and the truth of his life. I had to get these vials analyzed. I finally reached the ground, running into the shadowy street, the thermal bag now gripped tightly, a lifeline and a burden all at once. I found a waiting taxi and shoved myself into the back seat, gasping out the address of the discreet lab. As the cab pulled away, weaving through the late-night traffic, I pulled out my phone, quickly texting the lab contact a burner number I'd secretly acquired to alert them of my impending arrival. The urgency was suffocating. I felt like the walls of the cab were closing in on me, convinced those men were right behind us, their flat, empty eyes watching my every move from the darkness. We arrived at the facility, a secure, unmarked building, and I practically vaulted out of the cab, clutching the package. As I rushed up the steps, the automatic glass doors slid open, revealing the small, empty reception area. I spotted the secure drop box, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. I was about to insert the package when a woman in a lab coat stepped out from behind the desk, blocking my path, her expression one of cold, professional regret. She didn't reach for the package. She reached for her radio, and her eyes held the terrifying, final truth. I had walked straight into their trap. The woman in the lab coat blocked my path, her hand hovering near her radio, her eyes fixed not on my face, but on the thermal bag clutched against my chest. Her composure was chilling, a mask of calculated indifference that was far more terrifying than the obvious menace of the men at my apartment. The reception area suddenly felt like a cage, brilliantly lit and inescapable. I realized with a sickening lurch that the entire operation, the discrete number, The promise of security was a sophisticated lure designed to make me deliver the evidence directly to the conspirators. "Mrs. Hayes," the woman said, her voice low and calm, using my married name, a terrifying confirmation that they knew exactly who I was. "Dr. Vaughn sends his regards. He understands you've been searching for answers, but your search ends here, Vaughn, the toxicologist. But how did he get to me so fast? How did he know my burner number and my plan?" The realization hit me like a physical blow, cold and absolute. Vaughn wasn't acting alone, and he had access to a spy close to me. I took a frantic step back, ready to bolt, but two doors slid open simultaneously, and the men from my apartment strode into the room, cutting off both my escape routes. My desperation was now total. I was trapped, holding the only proof that could save Gabriel's legacy and expose his killers. I felt the heat of panic rising, the blood roaring in my ears, yet I wouldn't surrender the vials. I promised Gabriel I would make his life mean something. I looked desperately at the woman, searching for any flicker of humanity, any sign of a moral conflict beneath her cool facade. Her eyes were empty. I noticed a small, distinct ring on her finger, a delicate antique gold piece. My breath hitched. I'd seen that ring before, decades ago, in a faded photo Gabriel kept hidden. His old college mentor, Professor Elias Cole, wearing that exact ring while posing with his daughter. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle slammed into place. The woman wasn't just Vaughn's accomplice. She was Cole's daughter, running the fake lab and acting as their agent. The conspiracy was a family business, rooted in deception and ambition. And they'd been eye-screened and hurled the thermal bag containing the vials with every ounce of strength I had left, aiming it wildly at the large glass window behind the woman. The impact was deafening, a sharp, sickening crash as the insulated bag shattered the reinforced pane, sending shards of glass and plastic skittering across the pavement outside. The two men reacted instantly, turning towards the broken window, their professional masks cracking with a flash of rage and panic at the sight of the compromised evidence. The woman, Cole's daughter, cursed under her breath and momentarily lost her composure, her hand moving from the radio to frantically cover her face against the spray of glass. That single second of distraction was the only chance I had. I didn't hesitate. I dropped low and bolted toward a narrow corridor I'd spotted earlier, praying it led to a back exit or, failing that, just a temporary hiding place. I heard the men shout my name as their heavy footsteps pounded across the tiled floor behind me, their earlier coldness replaced by desperate, lethal pursuit. I flew down the dimly lit hallway, the memory of Gabriel's last urgent touch and his whispered promise of legacy fueling my exhausted body. I knew the vials were now outside, scattered perhaps, but at least not in their hands, a small victory, but one that guaranteed my immediate danger. They wouldn't stop until they had retrieved the evidence and, more importantly, neutralized the only person who knew the full truth of their decade-long fatal conspiracy. My life was now worth less than the 2 samples of tainted blood. The corridor dead-ended abruptly at a heavy metal fire door. My heart sank. I was trapped. I shoved my full weight against the panic bar, but the door shuddered stubbornly, refusing to budge. The footsteps behind me were closer now, heavy and terrifyingly fast. I could hear one of the men cursing, his voice echoing menacingly off the cold walls. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to melt into the shadows, a desperate, cornered animal waiting for the inevitable confrontation. One of the men rounded the corner, his eyes sharp and focused, instantly spotting me in the gloom. He didn't say a word, simply lunged forward, his hand outstretched to grab my arm. I sidestepped frantically, but his powerful hand caught my coat, wrenching me off balance and slamming me hard against the concrete wall. The pain exploded in my head, a dizzying burst of white-hot agony, and I slid toward the floor, my vision tunneling to a desperate pinprick of light. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the man's face, not the blank menace from before, but a chilling look of twisted recognition, a familiarity that shouldn't have been there. I wasn't just being silenced. I was being recognized, and the chilling truth about my captor was the final devastating betrayal I hadn't prepared for. Consciousness returned in a dizzying, throbbing wave of pain. I was lying on a rough carpeted floor, the stale, chemically scented air of the lab filling my lungs. My head swam, but the terror was a sharp, clear constant. I tried to move, but my wrists were tightly bound behind my back with heavy plastic ties. I slowly lifted my head, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, and saw the two men standing over me, their faces now clear and utterly devoid of mercy. The woman, Cole's daughter, was frantically sweeping up the last shards of glass from the shattered window. "You made this much more difficult than it had to be, Maya," one of the men said, his voice a low, chilling monotone. It was the man who had hit me, the one whose face I had vaguely recognized just before I blacked out. My eyes fixed on him, searching for the familiarity that had briefly pierced my panic. He wasn't just a hired thug, and he wasn't related to Cole or Vaughn. He had a look of specific, weary sadness that I had only seen in one other place, and I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. I stared, and the terrifying truth slammed into me, a massive, brutal shock that eclipsed all the pain. The man kneeling over me was Liam, Gabriel's younger brother. Liam, who had supposedly moved to California years ago. Liam, who Gabriel had always said was lost, irresponsible, and a constant disappointment consciousness returned in a dizzying, throbbing wave of pain. I was lying on a rough carpeted floor, the still, chemically scented air of the lab filling my lungs. My head swam, but the terror was a sharp, clear constant. I tried to move, but my wrists were tightly bound behind my back with heavy plastic ties. I slowly lifted my head, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, and saw the two men standing over me, their faces now clear and utterly devoid of mercy. The woman, Cole's daughter, was frantically sweeping up the last shards of glass from the shattered window. "You made this much more difficult than it had to be, Maya," one of the men said, his voice a low, chilling monotone. It was the man who had hit me, the one whose face I had vaguely recognized just before I blacked out. My eyes fixed on him, searching for the familiarity that had briefly pierced my panic. He wasn't just a hired thug, and he wasn't related to Cole or Vaughn. He had a look of specific, weary sadness that I had only seen in one other place, and I felt my blood turn to ice in my veins. I stared, and the terrifying truth slammed into me, a massive, brutal shock that eclipsed all the pain. The man kneeling over me was Liam, Gabriel's younger brother. Liam, who had supposedly moved to California years ago. Liam, who Gabriel had always said was lost, irresponsible, and a constant disappointment to their ambitious father. The man who was now holding a piece of my coat, the same man who had just violently slammed me against the wall, was my husband's own flesh and blood. "Liam, what are you doing here?" I choked out, the words ragged with disbelief and betrayal. He didn't answer directly, his face a complex mask of guilt and resentment. The woman, Cole's daughter, finished sweeping and stepped forward, her voice sharp. "He's doing what he was hired to do, Maya. Liam was always the cleanup crew. He handled the initial threat 10 years ago, and he's here to finish the job now." The mention of the initial threat made my stomach churn with nauseous realization. Liam, the unreliable black sheep, wasn't just working for them. He had been involved from the start, part of the core betrayal that poisoned his own brother. Gabriel's illness wasn't just a conspiracy of strangers. It was a devastating internal family betrayal, rooted in old sibling rivalry and the pressure of their powerful father. Gabriel hadn't just been poisoned by chemicals. He had been poisoned by the envy and resentment of his own brother, who had been tasked with silencing his own sibling's career. The pain in my wrists, the throbbing in my head, the woman, Cole's daughter, stepped away, leaving Liam to face the consequences of his betrayal. "Tell her," she commanded, her voice cold. Liam looked at me, bound and bruised on the floor, and the weariness in his eyes intensified into a dark, self-loathing agony. He didn't want to confess, but the weight of the years, the guilt, and the sheer finality of the situation broke him. He knelt before me, not out of pity, but out of a desperate need to cleanse his soul before his brother died. "It was Dad," he rasped, his voice thick with shame. "Not the illness, but the cause. Our father hated that Gabriel was the perfect son, the one who would carry the family name and ambition. When Gabriel wanted to switch his research and leave medicine, Dad saw it as a threat to his legacy. Cole and Vaughn promised Dad they could derail Gabriel's career, not kill him. They exposed him to the chemical toxicity to ruin his health and force him out of the medical elite. My mind reeled. The true architect of Gabriel's death wasn't just envy or greed. It was the relentless, toxic pressure of their father's ambition. Liam, the disappointment, was forced to clean up the messes, the initial contamination years ago, and now the final cleanup of the evidence. Liam was both a victim and a perpetrator, trapped by a father who weaponized his children's careers. The deep-seated sibling rivalry and the pressure to succeed had literally turned brother against brother, a tragedy far beyond a simple romance. "I didn't think he would die," Liam whispered, tears finally streaming down his face, genuine remorse mixing with his profound guilt. They assured us it would just be chronic fatigue, enough to discredit him, to make him fail. But the cancer was an unintended consequence, a brutal twist of fate. I watched him suffer, Maya, and I kept silent. Every desperate hug, every painful whisper he shared with you, I knew the lie, and I watched him fade. His confession was the final agonizing piece of the puzzle, explaining Gabriel's guarded silence, the family pressure, and the specific nature of the poisoning. It showed that love alone couldn't protect them from the external malice of a broken family's ambition. I looked at Liam, not with fury, but with a crushing sadness. The vengeance I had sought seemed meaningless now, replaced by the profound grief of two brothers destroyed by their own lineage. The door burst open, and a third figure rushed in, a man in a police uniform. But he wasn't there to save me. He rushed past the guards and went straight to Liam, pulling him to his feet. My hope for justice was extinguished by the final shattering image. The cop, who looked alarmingly like Gabriel's father, embracing Liam, confirming that the conspiracy ran far deeper and higher than I ever imagined. The sight of the uniformed man, clearly part of the cleanup operation and resembling the cold ambition of Gabriel's father, solidified my understanding. This web was too vast, too powerful. I couldn't fight them in a courtroom. My only chance was to survive and expose them through different means. While the focus shifted to the cop questioning Liam and Cole's daughter about the broken window, I used the chaos. I remembered the shattered glass near the window and started painstakingly sawing the plastic ties on my wrists against a sharp shard, the pain and numb distraction from the overwhelming despair. It took agonizing minutes, the plastic cutting deep into my skin, but finally, the binding snapped. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the dizziness and the throbbing in my head. Before anyone could react, I turned and sprinted toward the broken window, vaulting over the debris without a second thought. I didn't stop to grab the vials, which I knew were now either compromised or retrieved. My only priority was to escape with the truth, the knowledge that Gabriel's death was an act of familial malice. I ran until my lungs burned and the sounds of the shouting men were swallowed by the vast, indifferent noise of the city. I never went back to the apartment. I couldn't risk leading them back to Gabriel, and I couldn't bear to see his face one last time, knowing the true, heartbreaking reason for his suffering. Days later, I received the call Gabriel had passed away quietly in his sleep, his final moments spent alone, unaware that his brother and father were responsible for his demise. My final act of love was protecting his peace, even at the cost of my own ability to say goodbye. I eventually took the few notes I had, the pictures of the files, and the story of the toxic ambition, and handed them to an anonymous investigative journalist, one who specialized in deep-rooted corruption, giving them the evidence to pursue the truth without ever naming myself. I fulfilled Gabriel's plea. I made his life mean something. Even if the world never knew the full, devastating story of the Cole Vaughn conspiracy, the ambition that killed him would not win. His legacy of honesty and brilliance would be the final, silent victor. The pain of loss never faded. It simply changed shape. I learned to live with the knowledge that our desperate, beautiful love was fought not against fate, but against a conspiracy of flesh and blood. I still remember the urgency of his touch, the sensual rebellion of his skin against the inevitable, those final, Stolen moments that prove that even in the face of death and betrayal, love remains the most potent, powerful force in the universe. I am still an artist, but now my work is tinged with the sadness of what was lost and the fierce strength of what I endured. I live my life intensely, carrying the lesson that ambition can be a poison, but love is the only true antidote. I survived, and I kept my promise, ensuring that the legacy of a desperate love would be the only thing they could never erase.